Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Blast off on another VIP episode of Hero Podcast. That's right. My name is Ryan, the original outlaw of the airwaves, broadcasting just south of Area 51 at the base of La Madre Mountain. Important stuff taking place, a lot of neat things going on, and I'm really excited about the compassion our guest has for today. Really cool stuff, whether you're talking about what it is we don't know and what it is we do know. We're going to try to get in the middle of all of that and concentrate on UFOs. The book is called UFOs, The Real Story. Paul has really crammed a lot of passion into this book, answered a lot of questions, and gotten deep and dirty into the entities involved. We're going to try to do all of that as well with all the important information in this book. But before we do, I have to do this very shameless self-promotion. If you haven't been to HeroParanormal.com, slide by, click that donate button, and for the price of a cup of coffee a month, you're in the inside loop. With that said, Paul Ascough, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast, my man. This is great, Paul. It's great to actually finally talk to you. I'm just amazed at your book and the way that you wrote it. The way you wrote it is so personable, and it's such a personal journey through the paranormal. And I wanted to kind of start with, I thought it was really cool that you had a graph of what you don't know you know, what you know, and what you know you don't know. And with that, Paul, I wanted to ask you, who is Paul Ascough, and what first got you into UFOs, my man?
Right. Well, basically, I'm just a normal guy who what can I say, has had some very fortunate experiences throughout my life that's led me to believe and think the way I do. I've been in the medical field all my life. However, I think I'm a frustrated engineer, really. Because what got me into the whole ball game, if you like, was a UFO sighting when I had round about my 11th birthday, so many years ago, and that's what kick-started it. That's what got me off down the road to where I've led to where it is now.
One thing I think is very unique about your book is entities fascinate me. Entities of all sorts, with the overwhelming amounts of reports of different entities. I know you have theories, and what theories do you have as to the variety of both craft and entities? Because you've had a few encounters.
Yeah, to me, right, would you like me to start with an explanation of the foundation of what I've built it on, Ryan, and then listeners can understand that? Would that be a better way forward?
I think so. I think that would be great, Paul.
Okay. I liken our life that we are now to, if you can imagine an old vinyl record, we are experiencing our life at the moment on the surface of that record. To the center is purity, if you like, and to the edge is evil. And all the grooves which the needle normally bounces along and plays the music and picks it up, the stylus picks it up. Instead, each groove is a life. Each groove is a lesson. Each groove is what you will experience and a way of helping you to move forward. And I personally believe that every single one of us are somewhere on our own record moving, or hopefully, moving towards the center. Now, the center is purity, what some people may call God, And so it is, and that's the crux of the whole thing, is we don't know and we do not remember where we came from. And that is the whole purpose behind it, because it's the way you think and the way you conduct yourself now that matters. And the way you use, or rather I should say, your morals and your ethics of how you treat your friends and family and those around you. And that is what will get you to improve and move towards the centre in this life. Now, I'm not saying that's an easy way of thinking by any stretch of the imagination, but if you can just take that on board, that it is by if you knew where you came from and what you were doing and the purpose behind it, there'd be no point. It's too easy. Therefore, we are here now, in the here and now, with no knowledge of how we got here, but it's the way that your thought processes work and the way that your mind thinks and relates with everything else. So if you've got a bad attitude, and would just say you unfortunately passed over in a road accident or something like that, you'll still have a bad attitude on the other side. You have to raise the game. You have to raise your vibration. You have to raise the frequency of which you resonate, and it's only by your own effort and by being able to marshal your thoughts and really think about it. And I believe that's how people, it's natural when you help somebody, you get a good feeling, because that is helping you on your way. Where achieving something by an ulterior motive gets you maybe in front for the short term, but in the long term, it doesn't help you at all. Does that make sense, Ryan?
It makes a ton of sense. It's better to get that full engagement for the correct purposes, it sounds like. And there's times it seems the other side creeps in, and I don't know how else to explain it. And I wanted to ask you, this book of yours is amazing. You have a series of events. One in particular that drew my attention that I have to ask you because I was so fascinated by reading about it was Valkenburg. And without giving away too much, can you go a little bit into that?
Sure, I can. Yeah, I believe right. I'll just digress very slightly just for a minute. If you imagine there's the one record that we are on, that is at our frequency that we see, we hear, we interact with everything and everyone around us. Mm-hmm. However, there are a whole stack of records. And in this stack of records, you are going to get lower frequencies and you're going to get higher frequencies. And this is how I believe what could I say, the whole of the electromagnetic spectrum, but we're only scraping the surface off at the moment. And that is how we, if you like, react, and why we get this slight overlap occasionally of different dimensions. So to go back to the Valkenburg thing, I was a teenager at school, 15 years old maybe, and we had, like many high schools do, we had an exchange with another high school. This one happened to be in Dortmund in Germany, so they used to come over and we'd take them places in England, and then we would go over there and they'd take us places around Germany. And this time we'd been to the three countries border where Belgium, Holland and Germany all meet. And we stayed around there, and there was a school that had quite good accommodation, but there was a lot of history from the Second World War on the town of Valkenburg, because there were it was quite a hilly area, and there were a lot of natural limestone caves. So the people and local populace at the time hid and used the cave system during the war. Anyway, so we're in student accommodation. So you can imagine, quite basic, and it was just a very rudimentary tower block, maybe 5 or 6 stories high, rectangular-shaped building, big staircase and entrance in the centre that went right up to the top. and each floor was the same. There was basically two large dormitories, boys in one, the girls in another, and on each landing at one side was a toilet. So on the last night we were there, as you come looking at the building, I was on the top floor on the right-hand side, which was the boys' dormitory, and on the left was the girls' dormitory. And we were there, and this night the girls were saying, oh, there's funny noises, there's. So one of the other guys said, oh, because as sort of a written rule, if you like, we weren't allowed to mix in the dormitories. The boys weren't allowed in the girls' dormitories, and vice versa. So one of them comes over, the girls are frightened, there's something going on in their room. So he's like, no, there won't be. So usual teenage bravado, you go and you stand in the door of the room, because you're not allowed inside. I was stood at the door of the room, and the door opened to my right, and then I'm looking down the length of this rectangular room. Straight in front of me is one window, and on the outside wall to my left are two windows, and the toilet was almost behind me. And the girls were say 6 or 8 beds, something like that. And they were all sat there in bed with the covers up round the chins, looking frightened. So I'm saying, what's the matter? Oh, there's somebody knocking on the wall. So I'm like thinking, as I'm thinking, nobody can be knocking on the wall. We were even above the trees. There were no electricity cables. There was nothing that could be near. And literally, as I'm thinking this, there was a knock on the wall. And it was directly in front of me, to the right-hand side of the far window. And it was, for all the world, like somebody was, like we were on the ground floor, and somebody was knocking really hard with the knuckles on the outside of the building. So I'm thinking, well, that definitely isn't mice in the walls or whatever it could have been. Mm-hmm. And all the girls are going, oh, that's the noise, that's the noise. So I'm saying, no, be quiet, listen. And it stopped. And then it knocked again at the other side of the window, near the corner of the building. And I'm thinking, this is very strange. And it was quite loud. It was a really solid knock. Wow. Then it moved down the outside of the building to my left, and it's gradually moving down either side of the windows, slowly getting towards me. What? It got where it knocked all the way round the outside to the end of their room. And then on the landing where the toilet was, the toilet had a window that was one which hinged at the hinges were at the top, and you push the latch out to leave it open, which we have done. The knocking went all the way around the room, then stopped, and then as we stood there thinking, is that it? The toilet window banged closed, and all the girls jumped. And as I looked back in the room, to my right and in front of me is the door open against their wall, and at the side of it was a light switch, and it was one of the old-fashioned toggle light switches. And as I'm looking in the room, the light switch itself went up of its own accord, and all the lights went out. So all the girls screamed. My hair stood on end, but quite as I think just a natural reaction, I flipped the light back on. And thankfully, they came back on, and the girls are crying, going, oh, what's happening, and all the rest of it. I thought, there's more to this than me, so I better go and get one of the teachers. So I went and got one of the teachers, and the teacher stayed in the girls' room, but nothing else happened. But from a paranormal point of view, obviously in retrospect, because as a teenager you're not sort of thinking straight as you were anyway, but from a paranormal point of view, I would say that as a building that gets hundreds and most constantly, I would say almost constantly full of teenage children, it would be quite logical to have some maybe poltergeist activity, and it was really strange, really strong, and I would think that it would be something that has been investigated by any local paranormal group.
It's my belief as well that areas where paranormal groups typically hang out and investigate to observe typically are the ones that retain somehow, that elementally retain that energy. A bit of that is in your book. You have experiences, personal experiences. Your book touches on a variety of subjects which are right up my alley, but one that touches me near and dear are cattle mutilations, governments, collusion, stealth black projects, technologies, and theories involving human interaction with entities that are not like ourselves. Can you explain what your opinion is on whether collusion has taken place at some level with non-human entities?
Yeah, I believe that we've had, if I just go back briefly to the analogy of the records.
Of course.
Where there's a stack of records on different frequencies, and I believe that ET inhabit the higher frequencies. You imagine a race, how far we've come in the last 100 years, where maybe, I don't know, 1% of people where you live now, Ryan, may have had a motor vehicle of some description, and the ones that could afford it went on the railroad, but the majority of people were lucky if they had a horse. So look how far we've come in the last 100 years, where everybody has a vehicle, everybody's got access to the internet, and how much we've moved forward. So you imagine a race that may be 1,000 years or even 10,000 years in front of us. So those higher records, those higher frequencies within the stack of records, I believe, are inhabited by many different types of ET, I'll just say that, visitors, for want of a better word, that completely control the electromagnetic spectrum. And they have been visiting us since we were Neanderthal, if you like, but since we were on this planet. But it's because of the frequencies that they're at. It's the same as spirit, the same as a lot of things that we experience, but there's no proof of. Even now, mainstream media, any stories on UFOs, any stories on psychic phenomenon, any stories on ghosts, they treat as, if you like, the comedy at the end of the main news. It's like a tongue-in-cheek look at something, and it's still treated that way.
Yes.
And I believe that we've had this going on since we've ever been here, and because it's on a completely different frequency to us, we at the moment do not have the capability to measure it, to tune it. If you let me explain, it may be easier.
Yes.
You imagine at the moment we're on our record, and you have the higher frequencies, which are radio waves that we're using now, and then it comes down through the infrared, and then we have our acoustic and visible light that we can see and use every day, and then it goes down through the ultraviolet, and then X-rays and gamma rays. Now that is ordinary matter that we are in control of to a certain extent, and that is ordinary matter that we are aware of. Now that's what 99.999% of us use and are aware of on a daily basis. However, if you imagine a lot of the cosmologists and, people with much better brains than I, the astronomers and all these people that are the scientists are thinking now that the vast majority of the universe and energy within it is made up of dark matter and dark energy. And you hear estimations between 75 and 95%, which means our visible light and acoustic spectrum that we deal with all the time is actually only 1/10 or less than 1/10 of 1%.
Yes.
Now that's 1/10 of 1% of the 5% that we know about. So there's all that huge, huge spectrum that we have no idea exists. And what I believe is that ET, I'll use that phrase for the time being, are absolute masters of the whole of the spectrum. They can control it, they're aware of it, and they use it to their advantage, so they can move and come and go as they wish to, and we have no idea that they're even there. And I think they are around us, and it's going on all the time, constantly.
Yes. And I love how, I want to tantalize listeners with a bit of some of the personal stories that you have in the book. One particular story, if you don't mind me kind of just mentioning it, is one that stood out to me was One encountered in the 80s. You were about to walk your dog. I believe you were with your wife. And a bit of an experience that if it isn't digging too deeply, can we go into that a little?
Sure we can, yeah. I was living in a small town in North Yorkshire at the time. As you're looking at a map of England, it would be somewhere in the centre, but 3/4 of the way over towards the east coast. And my wife was outside, and we had a huge dog, a Pyrenean mountain dog, and he wanted a walk, and he needed to be brushed, and that was my job for the evening, if you like. And I was in the kitchen, and my wife was in the backyard with the dog, and she shouted, "Paul, Paul, come here, look." And I went outside, and she's pointing up in the sky, and up in the sky was what I can only describe as car headlights. If you look at an old car as well, an old car through fog, and you can only see the headlights, but you can't see anything else, it appeared like that. And these headlights, what I can only describe it, were quite high in the sky, moving slowly over the house towards us. Now, our boys were there, and we had 2 small boys. They came out, so the 4 of us stood in the backyard with the dog, with our heads up, looking at this thing. Now, they didn't change, there didn't appear to be anything connecting them, but they stayed in the same relative position, and they moved until they were practically vertically, directly overhead to us. There was no noise throughout, there was no apparent rotation, no strobe lights, no anything. There was just literally a light, a very bright and very odd light in the sky. And then as they got almost directly overhead, they suddenly, in the same direction, flew off, zoomed off, literally out of sight within 2 seconds. And the first thing that crossed my mind, it was like warp factor 10, Scotty. It was sort of watching Star Trek, and he sort of pressed the button and off it went. Mm-hmm. And they flew out of sight, and that was it. And we were stood there, and it was like, wow. But that was it. They'd gone, and no sound at all. So I said, right, I'll take the dog for a walk, and I'll give him a brush. So dutifully takes the dog. Took me time, maybe 30 minutes, somewhere thereabouts. And as I came back in the yard, fastened the gate, and was going to brush the dog. And as I did so, I spent more time looking at the sky than taking any notice of where the dog was going. Mm-hmm. And as I did so, these 2 lights came back. So from disappearing the first time to coming back, from disappearing the first time to coming back. Are you there, Ryan? Is that okay?
Yep, I hear you. You betcha.
Oh, okay. Sorry. There was maybe a 40-minute gap between seeing them shoot off in one direction and then come back the opposite way. Now, this time, they still appeared the same. It was still just 2 lights next to each other in the sky. And they came over us, this time moving slowly, and they just continued at that pace until they disappeared out of overhead, and then till they disappeared outside and we couldn't see them anymore. Now, we was like really dumbfounded because they were all something odd, not normal terrestrial aircraft. And years later, I was with Philip Mantle. I was in Beaufort.
Oh, cool.
And I was one of their investigators. And Philip Mantle was, at the time, the director of investigations and didn't live too far from me. And we were sat having a cup of tea in his home. And as I'm narrating the story to him, he said, "I can tell you when that was, Paul." And I went, "Really?" And he said, "It was July 1984. And it was like, "How do you know that?" And he went, "Because I saw them too." And it was, "Really?" And it turned out Philip had been working in a factory in Morley, just about 5 miles south of Leeds. And he lived in East Ardsley at the time, which is on like a high ridge on the local sort of freeway, the M62 that goes by our homes. Mm-hmm. And he came out to go back. And as he did so, he saw these 2 lights in the sky, and he said, "Well, what's that? They shouldn't be there." So he said, "I drove out of the town." He says, and conveniently at a spot where there was a lay-by at the side of the road where the buses would pull in. And he says, I stopped there and got out and was looking at these lights. And he said, and you could see over the whole of Leeds, because Leeds itself is like in a bowl. and there were these lights were in the distance. And he said, the same as that, he said it was like two lights at the side of each other, very odd. And he said, do you know, Paul, they were reported several times from the East Coast right over to where we saw them in Leeds. He says, and there was more than me saw it. At the time, he was in a West Yorkshire UFO group, and he said we had many sightings that were reported to the group at the time.
Wow.
That was quite good, because it was nice to get some corroborative evidence that it wasn't just me that was seeing these things.
Right, and it's strange because this book, more than any other in my opinion, brings together different aspects of the paranormal and brings them together in a way that's easily understood. The book, I don't even know if we've said the title yet, UFOs, The Real Story. I wanted to delve into another aspect that you do delve into in the book, and that's realities and electromagnetic frequencies and I guess for lack of a better word, what do we call these beings? Is it interdimensional beings, or how do we, I feel like it's when we go to space, but on an exponential basis when we're dealing with these beings, because here we send things to Mars, for example, and we don't know if there's anything over there that may see this as different. In the Uinta Basin of Utah, which is very highly strange, many times one can witness what's known as ball lightning. And in your book, you discuss ball lightning. And in fact, you delve into Paul Devereaux's, which I was amazed, book Earthlights. Can we explain some of the theories behind how that may just explain many sightings?
Yeah, and I think it does. Paul Devereaux, I was fortunate to meet. He lectured at one of the Viewfora annual conferences, and I met him. But Paul he thought that it explained all the UFO sightings type of thing. And I said, no. I said, because, yes, I will to some extent agree that it could explain quite a number of UFO sightings. But his theory was that it was piezoelectric phenomenon that was generated, and it was a piezoelectric effect where it, if you like, generated unstable electrical energy as a plasma, and that until it burned itself out, that's what people saw. Now, I actually, while I was investigating for Viewfora, in our big city in Leeds, quite close to where I live now, a guy came to me. I went to his home, and he had seen a 6-foot orange ball of light move across the sort of inner ring road around the city centre, across the main roads, and then it just disappeared with a pop. And I said, at the time, I believe that he was very fortunate. I said, I don't think it's a UFO, but I think you're very, very fortunate that you have seen firsthand something like this piezoelectric effect, because you do get a lot of instances, and there are a few in different places around the world, where these are quite prevalent, shall we say. And he was just fortunate that he was there at the time. Now, one of the things which I believe quite fervently is, if you go back to the analogy of the record, or the stack of records, shall we say.
Love it. Yeah.
They're all on a different frequency within this dark energy. Therefore, you will have, if you wish to call it that, parallel dimensions, which are quite real to them when they're in them, that are alongside ours. Now, if, for argument's sake, you are an ET that are fully in control of this, you know how to use it, you're fully in control of it, you know how to manipulate it, you can move down and skip down between the records and between the frequencies, visit us, and then skip back up again.
Sure.
And I believe that is how spirit works. And now, to some extent, there are places in the world, we'll just use Skinwalker Ranch in your neck of the woods, and there are places in the UK where, well, for that matter, there are places all over the world where you will get these high strangeness places, and if you like, the Oz effect, as I believe it was Jack Vallee said, was where you get these, where the records are very close together,
LA. Yeah.
and you get a lot of unexplained phenomenon, a lot of paranormal activity, and a lot of sightings of UFOs.
Absolutely. And that's exactly, your book goes into so many of these things, and I'm glad that you mentioned Valet. I know that you studied and researched his work deeply. So many of your stories hit me deeply, very personal accounts often with family members or friends, and authentically exactly how it really happens, in my opinion, which is why I loved your title, UFOs, The Real Story. You go into you go into thanks as well to ufologists such as John Greenwald in the book and others, which I thought was so complimentary and deserved. I wanted to ask you, this gradual drip style disclosure, which it seems we're having, is it what is taking place, or are we looking at something completely different, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, in my opinion, it's been very difficult for, more recently, obviously, for the authorities to keep a lid on disclosure. Now, you think about this. They've had a tight lid on disclosure since 1952, I believe it was. And from 1952 onwards, so we're talking almost 70 years, they've kept everything under wraps and poo-pooed everything, discredited everything and everybody that's seen UFOs. So the majority of the population, UFOs, unless you physically see something, as the first sighting that I did, unless you see something that's so, for want of a better term, alien, and because it's so odd and so bizarre that it can't be anything else, unless you get to that stage, unless you see something like that, it just, because it's not on the news, it's not accepted by science, you don't see it in the mainstream media, so people aren't even aware that this is going on around them all the time. And we do have people like John Greenwald, we have people like Jack Bailey, and we have some fantastic authors that are doing a lot of work behind the scenes that don't get the credit they deserve. And what I've tried to do in my book is where people tend to do, we'll just say for an argument, the Roswell incident, or they might do Rendlesham Forest, or, the Belgian UFO wave, or Lonnie Zamora and the Socorro saucer. And they all give a slice of the pie. And what I was trying to do with my experiences on the paranormal as well as on the UFO side of things, because I believe that this is how it works, they are all tied together. And what I've tried to do is show that these experiences that people have can be related, they can work where that they are connected. And people say, oh no, I only deal with the paranormal, or I only do UFO sightings, or, well, I'm sorry, but they're still part of that electromagnetic spectrum. And it's the same with cryptids. I believe that cryptids, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, is exactly the same. They're not quite on our record. They may be on the record underneath or the record above. And in the right circumstances, we're able to tune into it and we're able to pick it up and we're able to see them. And we have that interaction, same as we do if you see a UFO, the same as if people see spirit. And that is when they overlap. Now, one other thing on this, which I think is ways, would you like me to explain how I think I've got evidence for this, how it works?
Yes, please, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that we'll just use, there was a Gaffney incident. There was Gaffney in the USA. There were two incidences. One was with the police, where police were chasing a light, and another one was a couple. And they initially were driving along the country road out of the town, and they saw what they took to be a transparent, disc-shaped object. And it was hovering or getting closer to them above some trees. Now, as it got close to the trees, it became more solid, but the trees caught fire. And they didn't have it in sight for long. It shot off. They reported it to the authorities. The fire service came and put out the fire. The police came and took the statement. But that was basically the end of it. But what it does show, that is if you want a better term, a craft is moving down through the electromagnetic spectrum to us and to our visible light. The part of the visible light to infrared, which is right next to us, which would generate heat, which would explain how the trees caught fire and why the fire service had to put them out.
Of course.
But also in the UK, the one that was investigated by Malcolm Robinson, which was the Decmont Woods incident in November 1979, where Robert Taylor, the forestry worker, initially saw a craft that was on the ground and was transparent. He could see through it. And it was only when it became solid that he realized what it was and there was something there. Now, this is easily explained, if you like, because they're moving through the spectrum. They have control of it, and they're moving into our world, if you like, and onto our plane of the record, and so they become visible to where we can interact with them.
And
now,
sorry, Rod. Oh no, I just love your record analogy is so much better than so many others. But keep going, please.
Oh, okay. Well, that was another thing. It was trying to find something, but because what I've tried to do, people tend to try and write things in scientific terms. And for anybody that, myself included, that picks a book up, if you don't find it entertaining, if you don't find it that you're struggling to understand part of it, that's it. It just gets thrown on the book pile and you don't pick it up again. Mm-hmm. And what I tried to do was put it in a normal layman's language rather than trying to boggle people's minds with science, which doesn't often work. So one other thing which, I'll go on to abductees, which I think is really interesting. Now, abductees will often report complete silence, and I mean absolute silence. They can't hear traffic in the background, they can't hear the wind, they don't hear the birds in the trees. They said there was absolutely nothing. And that is because, again, they themselves are being tuned out of their frequency. So there is no acoustic normal frequency to hear because they're not there. And that is, I believe, we have a built-in, panic button, if you like, where the human body, on a mechanical and chemical reaction to things, you will normally have the fight or flight syndrome. That is at one level. But I also think your subconscious on an electromagnetic level will recognize that it's not vibrating where it should be. And that's when you get this terror where people become very frightened and very afraid with anything like this. And it's what people experience both with the paranormal, with Bigfoot and Sasquatch encounters, and also with UFOs and ET. And people have this visceral terror. And I think that part of it could be because your frequency, your body, everything has that frequency. And it recognizes that it's not where it should be. It's being taken off the record where you should be. And it's sort of your subconscious, your soul, if you like, is aware that it's not where it should be. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. That uncomfortableness. Yeah. And yeah. You had some really interesting things in the book about dreams of explosions. Well, not really dreams, but like lucid experiences while in a mine. That's a separate disaster. Well, I don't want to give a lot away, but this paranormal experience, these experiences that you've had, such as laying that railway in the coal mines, these experiences just, in my experience, just kind of provide the foundation to the deeper questions. And I really want to get into UFOs. In the book, you quote one of my favorite guys for quotes, which is Leonardo da Vinci, with the saying or the quoting, "The noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding," which it just sounds like a ufologist to me. And da Vinci's quote blasts off your UFO section in the book, and you touch on and have great illustrations of the classic UFO styles depicted in the Bible. What are we looking at in these images, in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, in my opinion, we're looking at typical UFO encounters, and they haven't changed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you go through phases of maybe hockey puck-shaped ones, and then you'll get football-shaped ones, and cylindrical ones, triangular ones that are all the rage at the moment.
Right.
But you still, the last two that I've actually seen as a physical thing, one was hockey puck-shaped, and there were 5 adults saw that. And then the last one I saw with my wife that I have photographed on was like, well, what you would call an American football, we would call a rugby ball,
right.
But it was vertical, like the point at the top and the bottom. And that was travelling quickly against the wind and really high and shiny, so bright. And we had that in sight for maybe a few minutes, enough for me to get in the house and take a good picture of it. And when I did, the top of it was actually it looked as if it was shrouded in, I don't know, like a vapor.
Uh-huh.
Like something was, giving off something, if you like.
You bet. Mm-hmm.
Or reacting. But to go further on with the magnetic field, I think that if you go back to UFOs with ET being able to control it, that is how they can immediately... If anybody that's done any proper investigative work, they will tell you that they have odd memories. Now, I came across this with Dolores Cannon, Bud Hopkins, and more recently Kath Marden,
mm-hmm.
and they all say the same thing. And, I mean, Bud Hopkins, I was very fortunate to meet him, lovely man. And he came over one year for a Beaufort conference, and I was arranging the speakers, getting them to and from the stage. And I was fortunate to have lunch with Bud. And he says, Paul, I had no interest in UFOs. He says, I was an artist. He said, but I got into hypnotherapy as a way of counseling almost, as a way of helping people. And he said, it was only when people from different walks of life, different experiences, he said, from very wealthy to very poor people, and whatever geographical location they came from, he said, where in the world? But they were all telling me the same thing. And he said, I thought there's got to be more to this. There's got to be more than people are being led to believe. And that's how Bud became, if you like, converted to the cause, because he realised that there is more to it. And the one thing that stuck in my mind was how all of these people say that the UFO can be, if you like, controlled by thought. ET controls their vehicles by thought. Therefore, everything's done at an energy. The way where you're sat now, Ryan, in front of the computer, you give
mm-hmm.
off an energy.
Right.
The computer, and even Albert Einstein, he said, everything is energy, and you can't destroy it. It continues. It's there all the time. And you have an energy that if we met in real life, you would know instinctively, your subconscious would know whether we got on, because your magnetic field, your aura, as they call it sometimes in spiritual terms, mm-hmm. your aura would buff against mine, so we would know immediately if we got on. Even if somebody's very polite and, you still know instinctively if you're going to get on with somebody. And that's because your magnetic field reacts with their magnetic field. So everything around us, the computer in front of you, the chair that you sat on, the room you sat in, even the building, everything has a magnetic field that reacts with every other magnetic field. And this is happening around us all the time. Now, if you think ET are able to control this and understand it and manipulate it, that is why they can just appear at the side of you wherever you are without being seen up until that point. That is why people are floated out through the ceiling. People have floated out through the wall, a window, or even a closed door, for that matter, because you're not on this record. They've tuned you to the record above, or 2 or 3 records above that even. And because they have the technology and the understanding to be able to do that, we don't. To us, it's, what can I say, it's not accepted by our normal scientific community because there's no proof. You cannot prove it, or at the moment we cannot prove it.
And I think we're getting closer. We are.
Oh, I do. Yes, I think so too.
And
I think that's why over the years things have developed, shall we say, from the 1950s and 60s and the George Adamski and Elizabeth Clara and those sort of contactees to more present-day ones. Because you have to think on E.T. moves on as well, as we do. And we have much more technologically understanding than we used to have. But also, it's, if you go back to when I mentioned earlier about the bettering yourself and your improvement in your life by your own effort and your own thoughts, because each thought is actually an energy. Your brain works off electrical energy. There's no hardwired disc or anything in there. It's done off electrical impulses and electrical energy. So every thought you have and the intention behind it is a wave that ET can measure. I mean, we sort of can look at it in the very basics with EEGs that we have now, but we don't necessarily understand all of it. We're sort of scratching the surface, where I believe ET are absolute masters and do understand it. And that is why we remember things differently. You get abductees that will remember, oh, there was a vehicle at the side of the road. Or I can remember an owl in a tree. And you do get that quite often. And what tends to happen is they can, if you like, substitute a more acceptable memory to something that would be more frightening. And well, I'll give you an example. Again, it was an investigation I did for Bufora in '95, where 4 adults were abducted. And it was 2 boys, 2 men, 2 women, 2 couples. And one of the men said, I can remember there being a very strange atmosphere, and the whole of the evening just isn't, the memory isn't correct. He said, I can remember thinking, why is it dark? How has it got dark so quickly? And he said, if you normally think about things, your mind will, I know you don't remember every detail, and your mind will fill in the gaps. But he said, where you would normally, if you're going to liken it to a videotape, where you should be able to remember things reasonably, chronologically, and with detail from different parts of it, depending on what made an impression at the time. But he said it was completely different that night that they were abducted. And he said it was like the videotape had been taken out. It had been cut up into pieces. Many of the pieces had been discarded, and the ones that had been put back were some or often in the wrong order. And I thought that was a very good way of describing it.
Honest. Yeah. Very, very honest way of describing it. And I think I think there's a lot of things when it comes to experiences, and in reality, how widespread the UFO phenomenon really is, which is something you delve in your book, which is my opinion as well. I love how in the book it is referenced as LITS, lights in the sky, LITS. I love that. I wasn't familiar with that terminology. And something in your book I had never directly looked at was the Persian carpet glyph as binary code and even depicting DNA. Oh, yeah. Can we go into that a little bit?
Sure. That was the Arecibo Observatory was had put out, like we do, put things out into space, like Voyager that went out. And what they did was put out a binary code with very similar to what went out on Voyager, but this was done by a radio telescope. And they basically put a thing out of our makeup of the universe, the planets, what we were and some of our DNA, and a sort of a picture of a shall we say, the typical human face. Very androgynous, but it was just in basic binary form. And then I can't remember how much later, we got back at one of our, back in the UK, a sort of an answer. And it was in the form of a rectangular crop circle. Now, I said crop circle, but it was a crop rectangle. But it was an answer to what we had put out in radio waves, and it had come back in binary code. However, the, shall we say, androgynous human face was changed for an ET face. The DNA had been changed, and the planetary setup had been changed. And they said at the time that unless you were really into binary code and completely understood it, it would have been very difficult for anybody to have hoaxed the...
Right.
I won't say crop circle, but crop rectangle. Now, it was called the Persian carpet at the time because of the shape of it and the way that it looked.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one of those odd things that tend to get swept under the carpet.
It's crazy.
Tend to get, ridiculed by the mainstream media. And because people don't understand or are not aware of it, they just think, oh, yeah, somebody's just done that and they're not bothered, and they just dismiss it. And I think that's true of a lot of the paranormal. And mainstream science at the moment, unfortunately, is severely lacking because we are finding it very difficult to find proof of any of it. For proof of UFOs, proof of anything like that, proof of Bigfoot, proof of spirit or ghosts, and it's just because it's not on our plane, because it's not on our record, and because we are, with our normal scientific instrumentation at the moment, are unable to record it, it's just not given the credence that it should be.
Correct. Just because it's fringe. It seems like just the fringeness of it takes away something from it. And something I had interesting is, this stuff has been going on forever. In your book, you actually mention in 1996, the American entertainer Bob White, aka Robert Lee, went public with a story on how he obtained a piece of metal that was discharged from a UFO. And yet here we are still dealing with metamaterials. And it's so amazing how the time changes, but the quandary remains the same.
Yeah. And he's not alone. There are others apart from Bob that have found these metals and been analysed, and then, so what? And it's really, really difficult. I mean, there are people that, again, it's very subjective, and you have to be there. But there are sightings where, we'll take one for argument's sake, the Jerusalem, UFO over the Dome of the Rock at Jerusalem.
Okay.
Now, have you seen that video?
It's earth-shattering. It's like amazing.
Yeah. Now, what happened there, I've been to the Dome of the Rock or Jerusalem,
so
and I've
jealous.
actually stood where some of the video was taken.
I need to go.
My wife and I went there on a trip. We're very fortunate. And we did the Via della Rosa and all the touristy bits. But for me, it was nice to be in the place where these videos were taken from, and you could see their perspective. And in total now, there are 6 different videos that have come to light from different groups of people, not connected, as well as the, time-lapse camera that was taken from Jerusalem's own weather station. And then, as a way of discrediting it...
Of course, because they always have to do that.
Filmmakers made one with CGI, and guess what? CNN, in their wisdom, out of all the films that were available,
The Enemy
used the one that had been hoaxed with CGI. And it's like, why do they do this you know. When you've got something like that where you may have 6 or 7 different recordings from different places, you may have 100, 200 different witnesses that are all saying the same thing. So you've got photographic, video, eyewitness accounts, because at the end of the day, you have to look at all the corroborative evidence as well. And you've got all that, and then CNN just put the one on that somebody had put in just to put doubt in people's minds.
It makes you wonder sometimes, doesn't it? Like if they're trying to derail or go along with a particular narrative.
Yeah, that's correct.
And a question, something amazing. It's made strangely with material pulled from it. Another thing I'm pulling from your book that I was unaware of, this stone rock depicting, well, moon phases. It spins when a magnet is near it. Another alien artifact in general. Where do you sit with alien artifacts and and you do touch on it, the alien astronaut theory?
Yeah, well, I think you see, if you think about it, the term itself was coined, I suppose, by Eric von Däniken.
Right.
And the ancient astronauts, for us, the astronaut bit of what has only come in recently, if you can imagine, there were sky gods for the American Indians, or star people, I should say, sky gods for Central America. And it's the same story the world over. So, again, it's putting credence to it, which is very difficult to prove. But when you have these different races of people that don't know each other, they've had no contact with each other, but they're all coming up with very similar stories of sky people, sky gods, whatever you want to call them, coming down and interacting with them.
Yes. Some kind of, it's unique information coming through. And it's made strangely, usually, and your book touches on so much other than your book coming from one of my very favorite booksellers, the Flying Disc Press. Even though we're a little bit ahead of it, I know we're getting close on time. And in conclusion, tell our listeners where they can find all your unique information, your book, and possibly UFO merchandise.
Yep, well, it's all available from Flying Disc Press. It's available on the internet. And my book, UFOs, The Real Story, is out on Amazon as a paperback, as an ebook, and I believe it could be from today or tomorrow. It's very shortly anyway. It's also available on audiobook. So
cool. And what a good read. I like how it's so personalized. The book and I couldn't put it down, and it sounds like a long laundry list, but I pulled a lot of things from your book, and it's just done properly. The way the way you did it is just great. Very personal experiences, and you avoid all of the pitfalls that I think a lot of the more scientific books fall into.
Yeah. Well, I think what I've tried to do is, because it's personal experiences and it's just my explanations of it, I will say quite upfront straight away, I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert, these are just my experiences and these are my conclusions that I've come to. But, as I say in the book, I'm a Yorkshireman and I think I'm right. And this is a quick one if I may.
Please.
Where we, as a child, we used to walk out, as a teenager, I used to walk past the spiritualist church, which was about 100 yards from our home. So when I'm going out to meet my friends to go out on a night or anything else, I used to have to walk past the church. Now, we had attended when I was younger, but my parents went, but I didn't. As teenagers, church tends to take a back seat, and other things like motorcycles and cars and girls and everything else, sport, all have a greater priority. And one day I'm walking past the church and there's this old guy stood outside smoking a cigarette in a three-piece suit, by the way. And he stood outside, cool. And as I'm walking by, I didn't know him at all. As far as I can recollect, never seen him before in my life. And he said, "Paul, have you got a minute?" And I thought, I don't know, this guy knows me, but maybe he knows my parents, I don't know. Mm-hmm. So I walked up to him. And he said, just a moment. And he got this dirty piece of paper out of his pocket and a little pen, and he wrote something on it, and then he showed me the piece of paper. And he'd just written the 3 letters, UFO. So I am looking at him thinking, how in the world, because my parents didn't know that I was really into UFOs that much. You know, I was an avid reader, but that, as you were aware, all teenagers tend to live their own lives and only sort of, what can I say, the parents are only involved when they want them to be involved.
Yep.
But anyway, so he'd written UFO, and he showed me this, and then he said, Spirit have told me to show you this, and just to let you know that you're thinking along the right lines. Now, Whoa. This sort of blew my mind at that time, because I didn't know this guy. Nobody, including my parents, could know what I was thinking or the research and the books that I was reading and all the rest of it. So for a complete stranger to come and do this and say, I think you're thinking along, or Spirit are telling me that you're thinking on the right lines, was, I think everything happens for a reason in your life. There's no such thing as coincidence. And I firmly believe that. Everything happens for a reason, and when the time is right, things will happen in your life. You will be steered in the right direction. And this was one of those moments.
I love it. And I hate to take any more of your time, but one I have to ask you about, just another little tantalizing tidbit so people buy your book because it's worth every penny. The monk at the pub that you mentioned in the book. Oh my gosh, what a story. These things, I just want to go into residual energies and really quick, how does this happen? Yeah. How does this happen? Is it, I think well, you explain it, and I'll let you kind of get to it.
Yeah. Well, I occasionally used to go to a local club where in an old village it was Selby, and there was Selby Abbey, which is a huge old Gothic structure from about 1180, so very, very old. And there was, I can't remember the name, but anyway, there were these monks that inhabited the abbey, and the cloisters at the side were built from this old honey-coloured stone, beautiful stone, all finished beautifully. And when it was dismantled, and after King Henry dissolved most of the religious background of the British people, the stone was just left in rubble in piles, and people used it. It was a huge old rambling public house, come hotel, come stables. There were all sorts at the time, and they were built out of the stone of this building, out of the abbey. And the people that worked there often said they had seen the ghost of a monk. Now, I was there, and I have to say, hand on my heart, I never saw or felt anything. However, I find it quite logical that if, for argument's sake, where you live now, Ryan, if you live there I've lived where I live now for 25 years, and if you live in one place, now that monk could have been in his cell, in his cloister, his room, for 50 years. So his energy that he's giving off, his frequency, is being implanted, if you like, and being picked up by the fabric of the stones around him. So cool. Therefore, for me, it's quite logical that even 200 years later, in the right circumstances, somebody could pick up that frequency and know that a monk had lived within those stones. Now, to me, that is a ghost, because there's no spirit there. It is just the impression of the energy that they're picking up, if that makes sense.
It does. It's chilling. And I think that's a good way to conclude it. I can't thank you enough for being here, but I will try. You're the man, and I adore your contribution to the field from across the pond. And I highly recommend all my listeners keep up with yourself and the Flying Disc Press. Always great new information. And thanks again for being here, Paul.
You're more than welcome anytime, Ryan. I've really enjoyed it.
All right. Take care. I hope we talk soon. And until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, my man.
Yeah, that's what everybody should be doing. Thank you, Ryan. You take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
There you have it. Paul Ascough. He's I swear, the way the Flying Disc Press brings all these unique authors, informations, books, merchandise, that the way they bring listeners together and people with unique experiences, it's slightly different to our own because it is in the UK, but something that we need to really take advantage of because the contributions are there and there's so many of them. And, well, anyway, keep up with the Flying Disc Press. I thank Philip Mantle, Paul Ascough. What an amazing contribution this book is. Pick it up. Keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Before you blast off, don't forget to go to heroparanormal.com, hit that button, and drop a contribution. That's how we keep it going. Thank you, guys.